Got a sunburn to peel the daggers off your tongue. Young and dumb, I'm rotting like a bed sore in a cold case that's never gonna be more than scratching at the walls while you're waiting for a bullet to come. All along I've been treading in the deep end, throw my mirror in the cupboard for the weekend. Try and put together pieces while I'm dreaming, but nothing's adding up to a thing but a hole in the head.
An opportunity here to provide leadership, support, and a voice to the voiceless. The sacrifices that we made during our service do not end here. We carry on. We push forward, and we give hope and inspiration through love, community, and support. Stay free.
Rights and freedoms in this country are absolutely everything to me, because I personally know the sacrifice required in order to get them back once they're gone. So when my brothers and sisters call stand 2, be sure I'll be there.
Legacy media will play their games, right? Like, this isn't about this or that. This is about freedom, period.
The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Brothers and sisters, you know, whether you're a police officer, military, check your hearts. Look where we're going. Man, wake up. I beg you.
If the veterans can't stand up and get a message across to the government, I don't know who can. I don't know. But we're going to give it our best shot. And I think we have a chance to win this and do it. But we need your help. And we need you to come, and we need you to stand too. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk again soon.
past their mine, sold out to the merchant shelves. Minutes after they took out from the bottomless pit, my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs.
Hey, what's up, troops? Sergeant Major with Veterans for Freedom. Actually, I'm the magnanimous Gen Xer male now. Jeff Evely back with you now on this first day of March 2023. It looks like spring is just around the corner, so we're looking forward to some of that. And we got all the regulars on board with us here today. It's going to be a pretty great show. I got Blair Ector backstage right now. Blair was involved, actually the lead lawyer in the judicial review of the invocation of the Emergencies Act, which, as everybody should know by now, was declared ultra vires by a federal court judge, Mosley there. So that was one big win to start off 2024. And it seems like the wins have just been stacking up here lately. So I think maybe we're turning a corner here, folks. The tide is turning. I imagine we're going to suffer a setback at some point, but don't let it get you down. I think in the aggregate over time, things are going to shift in the right direction. But I'll go ahead and say good day to everybody who's with us here today. Stephen says, government won't listen to anybody fighting for freedom. Yeah, you know, that is kind of the sad state of affairs, really, is We got to stand on guard for thee. We got to keep fighting for freedom. It takes maintenance. It takes effort. It's not the default setting on the human species. Without that effort, we will fall to tyranny. Darlene is with us as always, says, good afternoon, everyone watching from New Brunswick. Good afternoon to you. And she has shared it out. Thanks for the top cover. And Evelyn is here saying, hello, all. No push-ups for Evelyn today. She's on time. Awesome. Cindy, our most faithful of all watchers, says, good day. Jeff gives us the hearts and says, I got some great news today. Good afternoon, friends. All right, Cindy, it's good. That's good to hear. And Stacy says, good morning to Darlene. And let me so Marion is here as always. It says, good day, friends. Freedom for all. And there's Colleen says, hello, everyone. And let me see. We got Steve on board. He says shared. And Randy's saying the Rumble stream is down, but I see Jason Levine over on Rumble, and he says this should be a great stream. Thanks, Jason, for being with us, brother. So I think it's okay. I was just monitoring, and it looks like we got plenty of people over there. And happy Red Shirt Friday, everyone, from ST Relawney on Rumble. Yes, it is Red Shirt Friday, guys. I got my Support Our Troops yellow ribbon red shirt on. This was a trend that we had while the Afghan war was going on. It's Support Our Troops Friday. It seems like that has fallen by the wayside under the current regime, but we're bringing that trend back around here. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into this real quick before I bring Blair in. Here is our philosophy quote for the day. And Blair and I met when we were at CPAC last weekend. And as it turns out, he's a rather avid Stoic himself. So I reached out to him for this quote to see what we wanted to go with. And we're both enthusiasts of Marcus Aurelius. The Meditations, as Blair says, is probably the best book that was ever written. So I highly advise everybody pick up a copy and read it every day. You will feel better. And here's Marcus, my boy, saying, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. And I often say that another way, as in the sweetest revenge is just being a better man. So, and I was reading him again this morning. I have a brand new copy, actually. It's not as ratty as my old one that I've been carrying around forever and full of pencil marks. But there are a couple of things that he really starts off with in some of the early chapters, the Meditations, that kind of grab me as well. But I'll forego those for now, and we'll get Blair in here in a sec. Okay, here's our meme for the day. This is Ralph Wiggum, and he says, I gave my freedom away to get my freedom back, and I'm still not free, and it's all your fault. And that is about the state of affairs in Canada today. But you know what, guys? We just keep up the good fight, and I think we'll get there sooner rather than later. It's going to take years, not days or weeks. But that's the kind of struggle that we're in right now. It's a historic one. And if we just look, even a cursory glance at history shows that these things don't happen overnight. It was 1929 that started the previous fourth turning with the stock collapse, and we didn't have the Nuremberg trials until 1946, and Hitler rose to power at about 33. So if we're looking at that rise to power for Hitler as being analogous to that of Justin Trudeau in 2015, that's going to put us somewhere around 2028 in terms of Nuremberg 2. Okay, so but there are plenty of wins that we're celebrating here in the interim. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to bring in the man of the hour, Blair Ector. How you doing, brother? Welcome aboard.
Jeff, welcome. Well, thanks for having me on. Good to see you again.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Yeah, it's really great to have you on, actually. I'm pretty excited for this one. So I thought I would start us off, actually, because I mentioned that, first of all, you were the lead lawyer for the judicial review there in the Mosley decision. But you and I had discussed quite a bit of, our enthusiasm for Stoicism over the weekend there. And so I thought I would just kind of pitch it to you, and maybe you could share some insight into how that guides you in your daily life and, the benefits of the practice.
Yeah, that's great. When we were chatting at last weekend over CPAC, that formed a large basis of our conversations. We thought, well, let's have a philosophy Friday. Stoicism is something I try to practice in my daily life, particularly Marcus Aurelius's version of Stoicism, which I loved the quote that you brought up. And it's basically, to paraphrase it, the best revenge is to not be like them. And one of the core tenets of Stoicism and why I think it really helps my life, at least, is that you can divide the world into two things: that which is in my control and that which is not in my control. It's called the dichotomy of control, which philosopher Epictetus was big on. And so where Stoicism is really helpful is that it grounds in, am I doing the right things? Am I taking the right action? Am I going through the processes that is right? It's very, it's not really outcome driven, which is the nice part of Stoicism. So one of the analogies that Stoics use and that I like to explain, it's like, imagine if you're an archer and you're pulling on your drawstring of your arrow and you're going to shoot and you're outside and you're going for a target. You could do absolutely everything right, line your shot up perfectly, but as soon as you let go of that arrow, a lot of things are outside of your control. A gust of wind could knock it off place. A bird could fly in the way. A number of things that could happen that are outside of your control. It doesn't change the fact that you had lined up your shot and you took it perfectly. And that really kind of summarizes Stoicism in a nutshell, is that what you need to be concerned about is, am I taking the right action? Am I living according to those 4 Stoic virtues: justice, courage, wisdom, and temperance? Am I applying that to my everyday life? And as a lawyer, that's very helpful because a lot of things are outside of my control. I can't control what a judge does. I can't control how a ruling happens. I can influence it. I can make my best argument that I can. But really, a lot of things in life, the outcomes, they're not up to me. But what is up to me is my attitude I bring, my effort I bring, the level of diligence that I approach my life with, living my life with honor and integrity. Those are all things that are always in my control. And one of the things I tell my associates and people that work with me as well is, like, my attitude and my effort, that's always in my control. That's something that is always 100% in my control. And it really helps, Jeff, as you know, when you take these Stoic principles, it really helps you live your day-to-day life and get through it. And it's not an academic philosophy or, very ivory tower philosophy. It's one for everyday living, for everyday people. And that's one thing that we kind of bonded over, which why I wanted to come on the show to talk about philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, like, what he does in, and now the Meditations was never really intended for publication. This is basically one of the greatest men in history's personal diary, and you can see from what he's written down that what he's doing every day is he's essentially coaching himself and he's preparing himself for the day ahead. And what I take from it really is that, my struggles are his struggles. And this is one of the greatest men in history. He suffers all the same anxieties and fears that we all do. These are just part of the human condition. And so I take from it, a kind of coping strategy when it comes to Stoicism. I think that's a central feature of Stoicism, is that kind of that coping mechanism that you get from it. And I think you shared with me too that you give this book to your employees as well. Is that true?
That is correct. Every single employee that comes to work for me, I give them this book, and I do my own personal signature into it, my own personal note to people for it too. So for your audience who aren't aware who Marcus Aurelius is, he was a Roman emperor, was one of the last of like the 5 good emperors. He's the old guy in Gladiator, in the initial scene in Gladiator. He's the old guy in Gladiator. If you haven't seen that movie, that's who he is. And yeah, you're right. So what the Meditations is, it's essentially, it translates from Latin. It's to myself, as he's writing actually in Greek. Well, he spoke Latin. He was writing it in Greek, which is the language of philosophy. And it was to himself. It was his own writings on the day, what he was dealing with. Like, I mean, at the time he was writing it, he was dealing with what were called the Marcomannic Wars, which were against the Germanic tribes. So he was far from the Roman palaces. He was basically in the forest in Germany while he was writing in that area while he was writing this. And yeah, his problems are our problems. He's writing about anxiety, about stress, about, dealing with the day-to-day life of what we deal with. I mean, it's really one of the early examples of journaling. Right? Like, I mean, this is written 2,000 years ago. That's what makes it such a beautiful text that was never meant for public dissemination. And I mean, when you look at the principles in that text, like, I mean, it is guided. It's guided some of history's greatest people, right? I know it's very big in military circles, especially Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Stoicism. If you've served, you need to have some Stoic principles to deal with things. And a lot of people confuse Stoicism. They think of like small s, like stoic. Someone's very stoic. They have a stiff upper lip. They have no emotions. And that's not really what Stoicism is, like capital S Stoicism. But it's more about how you process things and how you deal with things. It's not to say you can't have emotions, you can't feel things, be unfeeling, but it's about compartmentalizing and basically learning how to almost domesticate your emotions so you have a calm, cool, even keel under pressure. And as a lawyer, that's obviously needed, particularly the type of lawsuits I get involved with. if I'm having emotional ups and downs, that's not really going to help advocate for my client. And a lot of the things aren't in my control that I have to deal with. And, one of the things that Marcus Aurelius talked about, and then a lot of the Stoics talk about, and it's applicable today, it's not so much what happens to us that bothers us, it's what we think about it. It's how we internalize things that happen, right? That person who walks by and doesn't say hello to you, that in and of itself doesn't really harm you, but it's what you think about it and how you process your emotions and how you process your day-to-day life. And that's why Stoicism is such a rich philosophy that's applicable for not just academics. It's very much like everyday living. And I think that I owe a lot to what I've been able to build in my life, and just overall my viewpoint, my how I see the world to Stoicism. And I think that is an immense gift to share whenever I can talk about it.
Yeah, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. I want to say, yeah, and I'm not sure if I have the attribution correct there, but it might be Seneca who said that. I like the way you describe it there, because I actually think that, the fact that words like stoicism and cynicism are essentially pejoratives in the modern vernacular, like they're seen as bad things in the modern culture, is an indication of just how inverted a paradigm we live in right now. Because in fact, these are foundational philosophies in the West. And I think that what we really need to do in order to push things forward is get back to our roots. We have to get back to our roots as Westerners. We are the Stoics and we are the Cynics. And it's often taken, the small s Stoicism, as a negative thing, as being emotionless, but I think it's more accurate to say that you're just not guided by your emotions. You're able to separate that out and apply your intellect instead of your instincts to everyday problems, for example. But I think I first encountered this principle unwittingly, like when I was 13 and I had started boxing lessons, and my coach was telling me, he was teaching me how to slip and duck, and he said that if you raise your hand to a cat, that he will look away, and that's the wrong thing to do. Your instincts are wrong. You never take your eyes off your opponent. And part of the training, which I think Stoicism is essentially like a lifelong training plan, is to overcome your baser instincts and because they are wrong, and apply your intellect to your everyday life. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's right on. Is that reason is separate from the passions, right? And I think the Greeks took a lot of care to separate them, starting with Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. That whole line of thinking is to really separate reason and intellect from our emotions and our more base traits that we share with animals, right? Like in our more lower level pleasures, in terms of pushing more rationality. And that really governs the Western mind. Like, I mean, if you look at the Enlightenment ideals, it's grounded in those principles, is that reason, rationality separates us. That's what makes humans different than the base animals, right? We can reflect on our own states of mind, right? An animal can be scared, but it can't reflect on, should I be scared in this moment? Is being scared the right way to deal with this? Should I flee? We have a higher order of thinking that we have as human beings, and that it is innate in all of us. It's not unique to Jeff and Blair to have rationality govern us. Like, this is in all human beings across the way. And yes, Stoic-minded people speak less and observe more. And I think it was to the comment, Lorianne, and to show that I am a true Stoic and I do listen. One of the quotes from Seneca, I think it's from Seneca, it says, you have one mouth but two ears. Use them in that order, right? You should be listening twice as much as you're talking. And it makes you I'm talking on a podcast now, but it makes you a much more engaged with the world when you're listening. You're observing, you're willing to question things, you're willing to use rationality to guide you. Things at first appearance aren't always what they may seem, right? Sense impressions and our initial reactions to things aren't always what they may seem, right? And Stoicism would, in particular Marcus Aurelius's book, would say, don't just be governed by impressions that hit my mind, like think things through rationally. Like even when he was talking about his emperor's robes, which are purple, he's saying all these are is just wool dyed with a certain type of shellfish. That was basically the blood of like a certain type of shellfish was how they dyed the Roman robes purple. And he was saying that's all it is. He was talking about different, these fantastic feasts that they would have. And all that is just a pig roasted meat. Like, to really get to the core of what something is, and to not to look through the extravagancies or the values that we ascribe to things. And that's really a gift that humans have, is that ability to separate from our perceptions, our immediate sense perceptions, our emotional states, and be governed through our rational faculties. And I think we need that a lot, like right now in particular. The tenets of philosophy are timeless for that very reason, is the love of rationality, and that is what has governed the Western mind, what has governed our society for, at least since the Enlightenment, but this goes back all the way to the times of the ancient Greeks and the Romans as well.
Yeah, and some of that has been lost to history, or almost lost to history, especially with the collapse of the West Roman state. And then there was the Byzantine Empire and Constantinople that conserved a lot of that stuff, and it didn't really make its way back into the West for, I guess, the modern Western Enlightenment until after the fall of Constantinople in about 1450. But it was the refugees, I believe, that came from Constantinople to the West with the Greek writings that actually sparked the Enlightenment there. But one thing I wanted to touch on too, because there are a lot of parallels that we can draw with other situations in history, other times in history. And Marcus Aurelius, he mentioned, like, he wrote the Meditations while he was at war, like he was at the front with the Germanic tribes, and so he was the kind of emperor who would have tribal leaders' heads brought to him while this was going on. But at the same time, when you read his own writings, you can see that he's a very thoughtful and compassionate man. This was something that I think we touched on this when we were talking. We were talking about how the Roman legions actually started to use or I guess recruit some of the Germanic tribesmen into the ranks just prior to the fall, somewhere around there. And I know that you've studied this stuff very well. So could you maybe give us a little history lesson on that?
Yeah, happy to talk about ancient military history to be well-rounded. So one example, and I think this preceded Marcus's time, but when the Roman legions had initially crossed the Rhine, there was a German hero. His name is Hermann, or Arminius in Latin, and he basically drugged them out to what was the Teutoburg Forest in I think it's 9 AD. And it was a massive slaughtering of the Romans. But the same thing happened. They didn't really learn their lesson, because several hundred years later, they're still adopting the Germanic tribes into their military, into their the Goths, the Visigoths, and all of that in. And eventually, that very foreign influence of their foreign armies clearly had an impact on it. I would suggest, and I think many historians would suggest, which eventually led to the sacking of Rome. And kind of the moral decay that happened in Rome at that time, right? Like, I mean, Marcus is the end of what was called the five good emperors. He's the end of the line of the five good emperors. And that's the greatest, perhaps one of the greatest criticisms of Marcus is that he had a son named Commodus, who succeeded him. And Commodus was, he's played by Joaquin Phoenix in Gladiator. And Commodus was just a horrible, horrible leader. He just was. And, we've seen that descent away from those principles where Marcus was the philosopher king, where the kings were philosophers. They were these deep thinking, intellectual, very, very scholarly human beings. And then the five good emperors, none of them, they're the ones that preceded them, none of them were their biological fathers, which was a big thing, is that it wasn't like you just got this position because you were the son of the king, or you were the son of the emperor in this instance. They were chosen. Like, Marcus was chosen from a young age to be that because of his mental acuity, his honesty, his integrity, a lot of those the factors that Stoics ascribe to, a lot of those qualities that they really push themselves towards. And so one of the great falls of the Roman Empire as it goes on is that this descent away from philosopher kings being who governed, and then also the influence, as you'd mentioned, Jeff, of pulling in the Germanic tribes into the legions and into their own military. Certainly, I would suggest, and other historians have suggested, that played a role. And then also just the decay of Rome itself, right? The moral decay of Rome itself.
Yeah, all kinds of parallels I think we can draw with modern day. I mean, Justin Trudeau probably could have played Commodus in Gladiator. And we're in the process now of recruiting permanent residents to Canada who are non-citizens into the ranks. And there's there's always a question, I think, when this happens, like, if we need to defend ourselves against, say, their home tribe how likely are they to fight for Canada against their own tribe? And that's essentially what the Romans, that was the experiment, the social experiment, I guess, that the Romans conducted. And it seems that it was a total failure. And there's also, like, you know, the abandonment of these principles, like we've been discussing here, where it seems that we've fallen away from you know, our principles in the West, our founding philosophies, and we've lost our way right now. So all of these parallels are here, these sort of harbingers of state collapse. It's a sign of hard times for Canada. Weak men bring hard times, much like Commodus and/or Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that, in fairness to Prime Minister Trudeau, I don't think he's not as bad as Commodus, clearly. And I know you're saying that in jest, just so we're clear. Yeah, I don't think he's out there killing his opponents and nothing of that nature, just so we're very, very clear. We live in a civilized Western civilization. But there are some parallels, at least in terms of Marcus Aurelius's time, to the time we're currently in, because what he was facing was the Antonine Plague at the time. Like, so he had faced something somewhat similar, like almost more deadly than COVID when you think of per capita. But his response was to live very frugally, was to actually sell off the palace furnishings to take care of his people, and was very much like the person you want in charge in a time of a crisis. Was Marcus Aurelius. So there's a number of parallels between that, and then obviously the foreign wars. We're seeing an increase in foreign wars right now, which is, you know, cause for concern. As you know, I'm well versed in military histories, particularly Western military history and Northern European military history. But you know, we're seeing what's happening in Ukraine. We can take notice of what's happening in the Middle East, what's potentially happening all across the world. We're seeing these pockets and breakouts of war. So, you know, right now is a time when we need philosopher kings. We need people that are well-versed in stoicism, or are strong leaders, and also leaders that put their people first, that prioritize their people, not their ego, and not appeasing to different groups that are for all of their people. I think that's needed all across the Western world right now. Yeah, and you know, there is some interesting parallels of the time Marcus lived in to the time that we're in right now. You know, when you think of just coming off COVID, which is similar to what the Antonine Plague was. You know, how that basically gutted Rome's treasury, and Marcus was selling off his own personal items to just, you know, keep the Roman state afloat, and was putting others first, and that just kind of was his character, right? Like, I mean, we look at Marcus Aurelius as being the man who in history who power didn't corrupt. There's that quote, absolute power corrupts absolutely, but he's the example and the shining light we look to of the philosopher king it didn't corrupt him. He always had the best interests of his people. And he was also, you know, he would hold court for the citizens. So he was acting like a judge too, and was very fair, very just. And it's why he's so well regarded in history.
And by the way, everybody, Blair has an undergrad in philosophy. So as I'm always saying, I am but an amateur student of philosophy. I probably didn't discover it until I was in my 30s. But it's always good to, you know, bring somebody who is better versed than I am on the program, just to better enlighten myself, if not everybody else as well. And you got a bit of an interesting personal story too, Blair. So I thought I'd just give you a little chance to tell us a little bit about, you know, how you came to be a lawyer and how you ended up being the guy to prosecute what is now the most important win, I think, that we've seen in Canada in our lifetimes.
Oh boy, how much time do you have? How did I get here? So I graduated high school in Fort McMurray. I was quite a good football player, and remain humble about that. I was a good football player. I went and played junior football in Victoria. Did quite well in junior football, did really well. I was going to go on a scholarship over to Simon Fraser University. But that summer I was practicing with my junior team, the Victoria Rebels, now the West Shore Rebels. And I got my knee hit really bad, tore my ACL, MCL, PCL, meniscus, completely ripped off the bone. And then, Simon Fraser wouldn't give me a scholarship to go there anymore because I couldn't pass any physicals, obviously. So I lost that opportunity. And I was pretty down. I mean, I was figured out what I could do with my life. I think at that point I had about $6 in my bank account, and I met my wife, Marianne, my beautiful wife, who still together. I met her when I was 20 and she was 18. And she's like, what are you going to do with your life? And I was like, I always wanted to be a lawyer. A Few Good Men is my favorite movie. I always wanted to be a lawyer. But I never knew if I had the resources to do whatever. She helped sign me up for classes, did a lot for my life, to help get me set up and to be enrolled into school and university out in Victoria. I did well, got really good grades out there, had my choice of law schools to go to, had a number of options available to me. Having a philosophy degree obviously helps with the LSAT, the law school exam. Knowing formal propositional logic, that was a breeze. So did quite well there. University of Calgary offered me the highest scholarship I could basically get. So I came there. I was, didn't come from money, don't come from a rich background. I'm, from the hood basically to where I am. And came here. I thought I was going to do oil and gas law. It was in 2014. That's when it just completely tanked. Then I was very involved in law school with what's called student legal assistance. So I did a number of criminal trials, civil trials, and really liked doing criminal law. Really enjoyed doing criminal law. I summered at the Alberta Crown Prosecution Service, so I worked at the Crown for a summer. Made some really good contacts, inroads there. Then my third year of law school, my wife told me she was pregnant with our son Bryce. A bit unexpected there. So I took basically for articles the highest paying civil litigation job I could do, even though I had a very deep passion for criminal defense work. Did that for a year or so, and then I started Ector Law. And I started my own law firm where I did a lot of criminal defense work and got into doing more commercial litigation, constitutional litigation. My career kind of progressed, and as I see you brought up, that gentleman sitting there on the couch was one of my mentors, Michael Loberg. He's a fantastic lawyer, a wonderful human being, had a tremendous impact on my life. And we had a case, a corporate commercial file. It was kind of a hostile takeover type of file. We were on the same side, and we just absolutely eviscerated the other side, just completely crushed the other side. And we said, hey, he was actually going to go retire out to the Cayman Islands. And I was saying, no, let's do this full time. Let's do this full time. So we merged and we joined forces. And then we started a law firm in January 2023. And then as you see now, those are all of our lawyers there. Just started just him and I into where we've grown now. You can see all the lawyers there, plus we have our staff. And then how I got involved with the Emergencies Act case was when I was still at Ector Law in 2022, Michael was renting some office space from me. And he had just kind of gone on the Justice Center's website. I don't know why he did that. He did. And he's like, hey, they're looking for lawyers. Like, I know you don't want to work there. Maybe just give them a call and see what's happening. So I gave them a call, and they're like, yeah, there's this Emergencies Act thing kind of going on. And we're trying to figure out what's going on with it. We have a guy, maybe you want to talk to Eddie Cornell and that. And then once I spoke to Eddie and heard about Eddie's bank account being frozen, and you know Eddie quite well, the type of man he is, of utmost integrity, just a phenomenal human being, a man I deeply admire, have a lot of respect for. I heard his story and I was like, well, this sounds off. What do you mean? And the rest is kind of history, how I got involved that way. Then it was like, okay, well, I have to do this for you, Eddie. And I took Vincent on as well. And then there was two other applicants who were involved in the judicial review, who ultimately weren't found to have standing by Justice Mosley. But yeah, then we just kept the fight on, kept going. And I don't know, maybe I was the right person for it. I mean, I didn't come from very much. As I told you, I kind of had to overcome and persevere a lot in my life. A lot, this wasn't handed to me. I didn't just end up in the corner office here by accident. I fought, and I've earned everything I've gotten in life. And I think sports played a big role, playing football, playing rugby, playing hockey, having that gritty toughness and determination to just see it through. Yeah, and sometimes I kind of pinch myself. I don't know how. It seems almost like fate, and sometimes another Stoic principle, but it was kind of brought forward by Nietzsche as amor fati, just, love your own fate. I don't know. Some ways it just feels like fate. And once I heard from Eddie, there was no other option but to do this. And a lot of people
hard times create strong men.
Exactly. Hard times create strong men. I think so. I had my football dreams completely ripped apart, ripped away from me. A number of my friends went on to play in the CFL and scholarships all over the place. And I was a captain I was a very good athlete when I was younger. Kind of a lawyer now, not as built the way I used to be, but when I was younger, I was quite big and strong, and still relatively. I still play hockey.
I'm not the man that I used to be either.
but maybe there's a different purpose in life to have it. And having courage and having strength is something that I've had to have to just survive, to just live. There were points in my life where I just needed to live and survive. And I think that really helped ground me in the foundation that I need to take on difficult cases and to take on challenging things, and to have the stoic determination to keep fighting on. When you're litigating against the Attorney General's office, they're good. They are excellent. They are the biggest, baddest law firm on the block. Like, they are good. Like, their lawyers there are outstanding. They have a number of resources. They're smart. They're good. Like, they're very good. And it, it takes a lot to litigate against them. And there's times where, when you're up in the evening and you're like, you're looking through 10,000 pages of documents. I'm like, how do I survive and get through this? And, stoicism was something that helped lean through it. And ultimately, knowing Eddie and knowing Vincent and knowing especially what they had went through with the frozen bank accounts, given the background I had in criminal defense work, I thought, Section 8 against search and seizure was a really strong argument that the governments can't just have the banks and the police basically being the judge, jury, and executioner of who gets their bank accounts frozen and who doesn't. Right. And that's what it was tantamount to. There was no warrant. There was no judicial involvement. There was no even neutral standard for it to be involved for whose bank accounts were getting frozen. And so to me, that seemed like that's such an obvious wrong. That's such an obvious wrong. That's clearly contrary to the charter. And given my background of criminal defense work, I'd done a number of organized crime cases, drug trafficking cases, a number of those types of cases. So to me, it just seemed like that was an obvious breach of Section 8, knowing Section 8 jurisprudence quite well. And that's kind of how it was. You ask how I got involved. There was no other choice. There was no other option. Once I heard it was something I felt obligated to do.
Good on you. I think that you're hearing the call of duty, essentially. That's what it sounds like. And we can definitely empathize with that around here, because we just got to keep fighting. That seems to be the sentiment that is widely shared, of course, amongst Veterans for Freedom. As I have said to other guests, like, you're a veteran of the Canadian Communist coup now. So congratulations and welcome to the fight. We definitely appreciate it. And I have a couple of Toronto Red Star articles up here. It seems like you are getting some pretty good coverage. Like, here's the Toronto Red Star from the 23rd of January. Trudeau government's use of Emergencies Act during Freedom Convoy violated Canadians' charter rights, federal court. I'm not going to bother going into it all because, of course, they're still using things like the so-called Freedom Convoy in some of their verbiage here throughout their articles. But also February 15th, just a few weeks later, it says lawsuit launched against federal government over Emergencies Act after judge ruled its use was unconstitutional. And I believe they're talking about your lawsuit too.
They are.
Is this a mass tort, I think, if I'm not mistaken? Yep. Okay.
That article was very favorable, actually. That article was quite favorable. I'm glad the Toronto Star did publish that article. I thought that article was quite favorable to us. It talks through what we had done. Mm-hmm. And I think, I think it would be worth showing your audience and let them read that. I think it was, I'm very glad the Toronto Star did that coverage. I mean, I know that they may have not necessarily been as sympathetic during the Freedom Convoy. I'm not sure. I wasn't reading the Toronto Star at the time. I'm very pleased with the coverage that they gave that into it. And I think that a lot of people, it is shifting. And the nice thing about, when you're defending human rights and you're defending the charter, you don't have to agree with the people whose charter rights you're sticking up for. You don't have to agree with them. Like, again, one thing I noted was that we had one of the people in the lawsuit is that he was 17 at the time. And I've shared this story with other people. 17-year-old kid at the time, when the Emergencies Act went through, not only did he not support the Freedom Convoy, he actually opposed it. He was against the Freedom Convoy. He's like completely against the Freedom Convoy. But his dad went down to Ottawa, and his dad got his bank account frozen, and they had a joint bank account. So when his dad's account got frozen, his account also got frozen. And this young man was working in a kitchen to live and to support himself, didn't come from a lot of means, couldn't even deposit his check, to live. That's who this affected, and that's who this impacted, right? Again, the kid opposed the very thing that got his bank account frozen. And I shared that with the Toronto Star, and I've shared that with others. And I think that's awakening people to like, that's tyrannical action. That is unconstitutional action. That does not stand in the Western world, and we are not going to tolerate that. And any government that does that, again, I've asked, is this a political thing or not? Nope, completely apolitical from my perspective. It's the government of the day that did this. The Conservatives do that, I would oppose it. The NDP did that, I would oppose it. Don't really care who the government is. It's any government that does stuff like this, they need to be opposed.
It is down to basic principles now. It's not about politics. As your story about the 17-year-old demonstrates, like his politics were in opposition to the convoy, but when it came down to the principle of charter rights and freedoms, then he takes not a different position, but I think a principled approach to this situation. There's a need to stand up and fight for those basic principles that are under attack. So yeah, it's all the way down to that at this point.
And this impacts all Canadians, right? Like, I mean, there used to be, when I was growing up, there used to be the old American quote, I may not agree with you, what you say, but I'll fight to the death to defend your right to say it. That seems to be missed in all of this. You don't have to agree with people whose rights you're standing up for. Like an example of, like, I'm an Albertan. I'm very pro oil and gas. You can see the snow behind me here in Calgary. I love oil and gas. I'm a very pro pipeline, pro oil and gas guy. If there were pipeline protesters in British Columbia or here who were opposing things that, I believed in, and they had bank accounts frozen, I would stand up for them and defend their rights and say, no, you can't go and freeze people's accounts like that. And I hope that there's a shift in the Canadian narrative that, like, it becomes in vogue and cool to stand up for charter rights, especially people you disagree with, right? I mean, that's when it's needed more than anything, is when you disagree with people, to allow them to still have a public forum to express their constitutional rights, because that's what makes Canada, Canada.
Yeah, you're speaking my language there, Blair. It's because I have said that myself. I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will fight to the death to defend your right to say it. And we see all kinds of people under attack in Canada. I think I said that with respect to Jeremy McKenzie's situation in particular. Like, he's had his bank account taken away from him. He's been detained, and it seems like the dominoes are falling one by one. He's overcoming these, rather vexatious lawfare cases, I think, against him. But it shouldn't matter what his positions are when it comes to standing up to these basic rights. Like, we have a right to open a bank account in Canada, but these are the basic principles, the basic rights that are under attack right now. And still, they do seem to be rather unrepentant. Here is Chrystia Freakland and her response to the federal court's decision. It's about a minute and 44. I think you guys have seen this before. So, but fair warning. Here we go.
So we are aware of the court decision. We have discussed it with the Prime Minister, with cabinet colleagues, with senior federal government officials and experts. We respect very much Canada's independent judiciary. However, we do not agree with this decision, and respectfully, we will be appealing it. I would just like to take a moment to remind Canadians of how serious the situation was in our country when we took that decision. The public safety of Canadians was under threat. Our national security, which includes our national economic security, was under threat. It was a hard decision to take. We took it very seriously after a lot of hard work, after a lot of careful deliberation. We were convinced at the time, I was convinced at the time, it was the right thing to do. It was the necessary thing to do. I remain, and we remain, convinced of that. And I'll now turn it over to my colleague, the Minister of Justice, and then we'll hear from my colleague, the Minister of Public Safety. Arif.
So there it is. Now, as somebody pointed out in the comments, they probably didn't even take the time to read the decision, let alone carefully consider it, as she's asserting here. But they're going to go ahead and appeal it. I have not read the full decision. I have perused it to try to get a sense of, how fulsome a decision it really is. But I believe you probably have read the whole decision. So what do you think about this idea of an appeal there, Blair?
Well, so they have filed an appeal. The federal government has filed an appeal. But on different grounds than what Ms. Freeland was talking about. I think she missed the mark, because she's talking about economic security of Canada. And Justice Mosley went through at length to say that, the way the wording of the Emergencies Act and its invocation under a public order emergency, you have to have violence or serious threats of violence as defined under Section 2 of the CSIS Act. Economic security has nothing to do with violence or serious threats of violence with respect. So I respectfully think she completely missed the mark there in terms of what the decision actually stated. We have received the government is appealing, so this will be going to the Federal Court of Appeal. They have provided their reasons for appeal, which are different than what Ms. Freeland had stated there. So we will be responding to that, obviously, in due course as it plays out through the courts, as it goes through the judicial process. We agree with the Justice Mosley decision, and he carefully went through a lot of this, carefully went through all of this, and it's not as though Mosley was particularly sympathetic to the convoy or anything.
He wasn't.
Like, he's got some very caustic remarks about a number of people involved, and I think it's a good decision. Like, I really do. I think he wrote it in a very, very reflective manner. And Justice Mosley has a lot of experience with national security cases. He's a very, very well-respected justice. Excellent. Like, he was on it. He was very dialed into the hearing. Like, he's outstanding. It was an absolute honor to appear and argue in front of Justice Mosley. He was very engaged, very listening attentively to the evidence. And, you can tell when judges are listening to you, particularly when him and I had I pretty much only argued at the oral hearing section 8, which again, I'm pretty well grounded. Section 8 of the charter is against unreasonable search and seizure. He was very attentive to everything. We were arguing Hunter and Southern, went back and forth. One of the things, it didn't make its way in the decision, but when the Attorney General was trying to argue that it wasn't a search or a seizure of those accounts and they couldn't use it, he called their argument a duck right on the record. He said, that argument's a duck. Right? He said that right on the record. So that comment didn't make its way into the ruling, unfortunately. He said he had trouble with their argument. He wrote it in very measured language, but yeah, I think it was a good decision, and it wasn't. It's not like he just was siding with the protesters or he was sympathetic to them or of any of that nature. He analyzed the law. He analyzed the facts and the law that was before him. Right. And he looked at that very attentively and was excellent. He was an outstanding justice. As I said, it was an absolute honor to appear in front of him. I have a lot of respect for Justice Mosley, and a lot of people have said it took a lot of courage for him to make that decision because of being a Liberal appointee from that. But my view is, I've talked about lawyers and the role they play and judges they play. They are independent, and I'm glad he did the right thing. And I don't necessarily think there was some giant act of courage as if he would have been some Liberal shill of some nature. That's degrading to the judiciary and disrespectful to the judiciary to think that they're not free-thinking individuals that will weigh the law and apply it to the facts. So he did the right thing. He did the right thing, and I hope the Federal Court of Appeal looks at this, weighs it out, and comes to the same conclusion that this was an unreasonable decision to invoke it. And even if they deemed it was, even if a Federal Court of Appeal deemed, well, it was reasonable to invoke it, there was stuff going on, you still have to look at the economic order and the regulations that came out that clearly violated Canadians' charter rights. The economic regulations violated 2B of the charter for a number of free expression points, and the economic order clearly violated Section 8 of the charter. And I don't see any way that stands up on appeal, whether the Federal Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court, when you look at, in particular, the Section 8 violations that are found in that legislation. Like that, the economic order is terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. It gave a lot of power to banks and to the police to just freeze bank accounts with no neutral arbiter or no neutral standard. I mean, Inspector Baudouin of the RCMP basically stated, well, this was ad hoc. We just kind of made it up as we went. I'm paraphrasing here. And that's not how that works. That's not how Section 8 works. If you look at the jurisprudence coming out of Hunter and Southern, it was an Alberta case, and I don't want to get bogged down in case law discussion. But one of the things that comes out is that you need to have some neutral arbiter when you're engaging in these Section 8 issues. And a neutral arbiter could be a judge, it could be a panel. There's a number of different things. It doesn't necessarily need to be a judge. There needs to be something neutral. So it's not judge, jury, and executioner all in the hands of one party that has that power, right? There's some type of neutral standard that's applied, or neutral arbiter in many cases when you're looking at warrants or ITOs, information to obtain. That's a judge, right? That's a judge looking at it, being the neutral party to say, yep, go ahead with this. No, you don't have the grounds there. That didn't exist in the economic order. So I don't see any way, shape, or form that survives appeal. I feel that strongly about it. That's why I said this is the hill I'm going to stand on, and went back, engaged with Mosley pretty much entirely on Section 8. The entire focus of my submissions and my reply submissions, the ones that I made, were on that issue. And I still feel that strongly. And come to the Federal Court of Appeal time, that'll come up largely. And I see them as having a difficult time. The government, at least, in overcoming those hurdles. And But even the reasonableness of the invocation itself, like there were other existing laws in Canada that existed. I don't think the conditions precedent were met in any event. So we'll see what the next, again, to adopt stoicism, that decision won't be made up to me. It'll be the appellate judges that will hear that. We'll do our best to make our argument and leave everything on the table, do our very best, and leave, trust that the right decision will be made, which I do have faith. I do have faith in our judiciary. I have faith in being a lawyer and in our profession. And I do something that I've defended and I will uphold. And I do have a lot of faith in our judiciary. And I think that what we're seeing with the Mosley decision, which we discussed about, this is an example of a thriving democracy, right? That we have courts that can intervene when governments overstep. And this has happened in the past. Like, it's not as though the Trudeau government, the Liberals, are the first government to do things to violate Canadians' rights. You can go back historically. This happens. Governments do this. That's why we have an independent judiciary to step in when they need to, which we've seen happen. And I think that's a credit to our democracy and our rule of law that we do have in Canada, and that does exist in Canada. And that's something I will continue to defend my entire career. So.
And we appreciate it, naturally, because this is exactly what's needed. And as I have been saying, I think the primary battle space right now is in the courts. We have taken to the streets already and forced a tyrant to act like a tyrant. And here on forward, as much as, awareness raising is still a valuable exercise, the primary battle space where we're going to win this thing is going to be in the courts. And just to speak to a little bit, like you were saying, that it was quite a balanced decision. And like I said, I haven't really chewed on this probably as thoroughly as you have, but I did notice, like you were saying, he didn't really seem to be prejudiced in favor of the convoy very much in any way. He even says here, this is para 313, he says, I agree with the respondent, that would be the government, quote, gatherings that employ physical force in the form of enduring or intractable occupations of public space that block local residents' ability to carry out the functions of their daily lives in order to compel agreement with the protesters' objective are not constitutionally protected. Therefore, I find no breach of the charter right of peaceful assembly. So he actually shoots down a bunch of arguments here in terms of infringement of the right to peaceful assembly. And throughout this, he's saying, okay, no section 7. I find no breach of charter section 7 2D, 2D section 7. But it's not until he gets down a little bit further to section 8.
Right here, yeah. This was a big point. Section 8 was a big one, and that's mine. Almost the entirety of my oral submissions are on this issue on section 8, and I think he does a great job of section 8. Does a really good job of section 8, and I think that I don't foresee any ability for the attorney generals, as great of lawyers as they are. There's a lot of respect for the federal prosecutors and federal crown lawyers. They are very, very good lawyers. I would not want to be trying to argue that there's no Section 8 breach, put it that way. I mean, that I just don't. Yeah, I don't see any ability for them to overcome that. But yeah, we should walk through that. This is a good one to walk through.
Okay, I'll give this a read for the audience there, and if you don't mind, just kind of breaking it down, the differences between, because he's mentioning the different rights that are afforded under the Constitution. It is the Section 8 one that seems to have scored the win here. So this is para 324 from the written decision, folks, and it says, at first impression, the extension of the temporary measures throughout the country included where no disruption had occurred would appear to have been overbroad. However, a party asserting that a violation of Section 7 must not only show that the impugned law interfered with or deprived them of their life, liberty, or security of person, which laws do all the time, but also that deprivation in question was not in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Carter v. Canada, he gives the reference. In this instance, the deprivation was temporary in nature and subject to a judicial review, as the proceedings have demonstrated. As a result, I am not prepared to find a breach of Section 7, but Section 8, he says, Section 8 provides that everyone has the right to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure. A search will be reasonable under Section 8 if it is authorized by law, if the law itself is reasonable and the search was carried out in a reasonable manner. And he gives his case law there.
There's the body of jurisprudence there. That's all 100% correct. That line of cases, Hunter, Collins, Castlake, that line of case law gets cited every day in courts in Canada.
Oh, wow.
Literally every day that there's arguments on that exact trio of cases and that line of authority.
Okay, so he's basically saying here in plain language, so we can put this in kind of Reader's Digest terms for everybody. He's saying that the life, liberty, and security of the person that's afforded to us under Section 7, he's finding no breach there, but he is finding a breach of our rights to be protected from unreasonable search and seizure. Correct, and that would be the seizure of bank accounts in particular. Am I wrong?
Correct. And not only the seizure of bank accounts, because you have to also look at the search aspect of it, right? Because what they did is they had designated persons and banks were searching people's information. And, a person's even just their credit card expenses and the way they spend their money. I mean, that goes to the core biographical of somebody. I mean, you look at somebody's credit card statements, you can learn a lot about somebody just on that basis. Right. Mm-hmm. And so even that search element, even without the frozen seized bank accounts, even that search aspect of it is that issue too.
And is this like a reasonable and probable grounds kind of thing? Like they would have to get a warrant for this sort of thing.
Right. And if you looked at the next paragraphs that it was going on, it kind of went through the test for how you can get there. Right. So a reasonable provision right here, 327.
It's a reasonable provision authorizing a search must create a system of 1, prior authorization, 2, determined by a neutral third party not involved in the investigation, and 3, the standard of, quote, reasonable and probable grounds to believe, close quote, that an offense has been committed and that evidence of the offense will be found in the place subject to the search. And then he gives the case law there again, as noted. Hunter and...
Hunter and Southam, leading authority. Yep, that again nails it again. And that's the big one. If you look at number 2, determined by a neutral third party, that's the neutral arbiter aspect of it. The neutral, hey, I'm a judge. I'm going to oversee your warrant. You want to go kick this guy's door in on a warrant, police officer, come bring it to a judge. Let it, the neutral third party being the judge in this instance, sign off on the warrant. Then you go ahead and go do that. That didn't exist here under the economic order, right? That's the key. That was basically police go to the banks, or the banks, some banks, TD in particular, were volunteering information to the police to go, there, no third party involved. And then they made that decision to go freeze bank accounts. That is so contrary to fundamental principles in Canada. That's not going to withstand appeal, I don't think. I just don't. That's my position and my view. I feel, that's a really tenuous ground to try and appeal any Mosley decision, which they have actually challenged a Section 8 appeal. Well, they would have to, obviously, because it was ultimately found to be a Section 8 violation.
And that neutral third party, apparently just if I'm kind of reading the tea leaves with respect to the Emergency Measures Act inquiry, it was essentially David Lametti. Like he was standing there invoking this kind of solicitor-client privilege with respect to the reasons for the Emergencies Act invocation. So it does seem like he was central to this, among other actors. But in terms of the legality of it, he seems to be in the center of it, especially as Justice Minister.
Well, just to get a point, he wouldn't be a neutral third party, though, right? He's not that. No. That's he's not neutral. He's not the neutral third party. He's the state, right? He's the state enforcing this against the citizens, right? So he's not a third party, neutral third party.
Yeah, not at all. No, and conflicts of interest seem to be lost on these people, the principles thereof, that is. But they're still going back to this idea, like they're what was presented. Lametti was the guy who said to Rouleau that there was a broader interpretation of the Emergencies Act that would include, or give the governor and council the option to consider more factors than just the definition of an emergency under the CSIS Act, as it states in the Emergencies Act itself, and that legal opinion was something that we just had to trust him on. And so they still seem to be standing on that, and we still haven't seen the legal opinion. So it's
and we never will. We never will. Like I doubt we ever would. And there's good reasons why that would be protected by lawyer-client privilege, right? That I like that. There's good reasons for having that. But if you do note, with all due respect to Mr. Lametti, he also resigned the next day after this decision came out. So and I think that Justice Mosley addressed that. You have to look at the plain literal meaning of the words in the statute, in the legislation, right? Which don't say what you're suggesting is. And I'm not certain Mr. Lametti had said that. I haven't reviewed the transcripts or anything of that nature. So again, with the caveat that I haven't reviewed Lametti's own words in that regard. But that, there was the interpretation issue that came up that Mosley dealt with accordingly. Like, I have to deal with the legislation as it comes before me and the words on the paper, the plain literal meaning of the words in their ordinary grammatical sense as applied harmoniously with the act. That's that type of interpretive aid. It comes from a case called Rizzo Shoes. It's cited again everywhere. That when you're looking at that, you have to look at the plain literal language of the meaning of the words read harmoniously with the act. And it clearly says that threats of serious violence or threats of serious violence as defined by Section 2 of the Misuse Act. That is what is required. And what people need to remember too, the Public Order Emergency Commission, POEC, as it's colloquially known as, that's not a court, right? That's the government investigating themselves. That's an inquiry to the government investigating their own conduct. That has no binding authority, legal authority. And I think that Justice Rouleau there took great care to explain that too, right? And I don't think he got into any of the, I haven't read it in a little while. I don't think he got into any of the charter related issues, and that wasn't his mandate. No, right? That wasn't his mandate to do so either. So there's no binding legal authority for the government investigating themselves. Right? This has binding legal authority. This case does. The decision of Mosley is a binding legal authority.
Yeah, and Rouleau, it's basically a review, and he concludes at the end with great reluctance, he said, that it met the legal threshold for invoking the Emergencies Act based on all of the available evidence. But then we have a binding decision here from a federal court from Justice Mosley, and here we are at paragraph 372, and he says, I have concluded that the decision to issue the proclamation does not bear the hallmarks of reasonableness, justification, transparency, and intelligibility, and was not justified in relation to the relevant factual and legal constraints that were required to be taken into consideration. In my view, there can only be one reasonable interpretation of the EA, sections 3 and 17, and paragraphs 2C of the CSIS Act, and the applicants have established that the legal constraints in the discretion of the GIC to declare the public order emergency were not satisfied. So it does seem to be the case that even though they've been putting forth this broader interpretation narrative, that in fact, when it comes down to brass tacks, like the CSIS Act definition of an emergency is what applies in the Emergencies Act. So it's correct,
and that's the correct decision. And that's the correct decision that a judge has to do. That is correct. He's right about that. He's completely right about that. And he makes a point, like, if there's a different definition, that's up to Parliament, that's up to the legislature to make the changes to it. I can only deal with the legislation that comes before me. Right. That's the same thing judges. Like, we do this, interpreting contracts in a commercial litigation context. I got to look at the words on the paper, what they mean in their plain, ordinary grammatical sense, and that normal test. Like, he was correct. We don't get to import this. Well, I wish the definition kind of said this, so let's just make it pigeonhole it in that way. That's not how it works. And Mosley was quite correct in that. So, which he did. What I think, I would like to think that any judge in his position that had a review of the record, and particularly someone as experienced as Justice Mosley, he is very, very well experienced, would come to the same conclusion. Yeah, would come to the same conclusion.
And now, you mentioned this issue of solicitor-client privilege, where we were talking about Lametti in particular, and I guess this is something of a question now that they're dealing with in committee in particular, because they are having a parliamentary committee to review all of this as well. And I'll play a little bit of this clip here. It's about 4 minutes in total, but this is Glenn Mott's Medicine Hat Cardston, and here he's sitting next to Larry Brock, and these guys have been kind of rock stars in some of these committees that are reviewing the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. And the issue of solicitor-client privilege comes up here, as it has in the past. So here it is.
All this time, I've studied as much information as I can at this committee and outside of this committee on the invocation. I still believe more strongly today than I did in 2022 that the circumstances to invoke the act were not met. The threshold was not met. And in fact, agree with Justice Mosley on his decision that it was in fact illegal and unconstitutional. That is a binding precedent, unlike Rouleau's particular ruling. Now, The other thing that I think the Canadian public need to understand is Canadians expect their government to follow the law, the rule of law, and not create an interpretation thereof that is convenient for the government to circumvent the existing law. And, Mr. Virani, you had indicated that, there are hundreds of years of precedent for lawyer-client privilege. And, the relationship has lasted hundreds of years. And you know what else has lasted all that time? For Parliament to make laws of the land which govern the people. And by invoking the Emergencies Act, the Cabinet gave itself the power to pass criminal laws which Mosley found to be unconstitutional. And my question to you is, have you actually found and read the infamous broader interpretation? Yes or no? The government relied. Have you actually read the legal opinion, the broader interpretation that the government was telling everyone that they relied upon to invoke the Emergencies Act? Yes or no?
Mr. Motz, I'm trying to be helpful, but even answering that question would disclose social-client privilege, which I cannot do here. But what I would say to you is that
let me stop you for a minute. You obviously can you answer me the date stamp that was on that?
Mr. Motz, in terms of solicitor-client privilege,
okay, so you can't. The reason I asked that question,
the questions you're asking me,
yes or no, you've already answered. It was a yes
Motz,
or no.
Remember, excuse me?
Yeah.
Remember, we have interpretation. Please
it was a yes or no question.
Please don't talk over each other.
Mr. Virani, I don't believe for a second that the broader interpretation even existed when the Emergencies Act was invoked at the time of the invocation for a number of reasons. And, it wasn't really until the just weeks before the Reload Commission was about to begin that we all of a sudden heard about this broader interpretation, that it somehow magically appeared. And it's really quite disturbing that this broader interpretation is there now, and no one's seen it. No one's heard it, apparently. Mosley didn't get an opportunity to have it as part of his disposal, and neither did Justice Rouleau, who indicated that the evidence that he found to support the government's invocation was weak at best, and that anybody else could have come to a completely different conclusion. He was disappointed the government withheld that. So one of the questions that I've had for a long time is, who actually is the client? And you're hiding behind solicitor-client privilege. And why is it so difficult to, is it the government? Is it of Canada? Is it the governor and council? Is it the prime minister? Is it the attorney general? In your opinion, who is the actual client in solicitor-client privilege in this particular case?
In this particular case, the client is the government of Canada. And what I would say to you is
the same thing I said. Canada?
It's the same thing I said to Senator Carignan, which is that there's nothing to hide, but there's everything to protect. And what my job is to protect basic principles about the administration of justice. Solicitor-client privilege is fundamental to that system, as the Supreme Court has opined.
Okay, so yeah, that's about the state of it. We have the government as client, and if I'm not mistaken, it's the Justice Department and Attorney General who are the solicitor in this case. So I guess I'm just curious, and don't let me bring you into any troubling waters here, Blair. But does this pass the smell test here, where the government is its own client and solicitor? And would there be like a retainer and an agreement in place to protect the solicitor-client privilege, or what do you think?
I don't think there'd be a retainer in place. I can just say this in very broad strokes. I don't know if the broader interpretation legal memorandum exists or doesn't exist. Not going to opine on it. I do think the Justice Minister there is correct that the government would be the client. There is very good reasons for solicitor-client relationships to exist, so the government has that as well. That right should be afforded to the government as well.
Okay.
As a lawyer, I mean, I'm in the legal system. I understand the public. It may not always make sense, but there's a very important reasons why the government of the day, whoever the government of Canada is, should be afforded solicitor-client privilege when they are seeking legal opinions and seeking to obtain legal advice. That is, to my mind, completely sacrosanct. the lawyer-client relationship. Same thing if the government or someone's trying to ask my clients questions or were asking me about my own clients, I would say, not answering that. No, that's solicitor-client privilege, not answering that. And the government should be afforded that same right. And it may not always seem fair or it may not make sense, but and again, I'd have no idea if the memorandum exists or not. We would never see it even if it did, because there would be valid reasons for them to have and invoke solicitor-client privilege. That, to my mind, is sacrosanct, and the government has that same right as well that Canadians do. It's very important to our legal system that they can seek out legal advice, legal opinions from their lawyers, and know that that is a secured form of communication that's not going to be leaked out to the public, that they can rely on privately in contemplating their decisions. And there's very good public policy reasons for that existing as well.
Yeah, I understand. Like, there is a broader principle at play here. So that's why I'm glad that we brought you on to give us an informed opinion about these things, because we're all just trying to make sense of this, with the tools that we have at our disposal. And a law degree is not one tool that I have in my tool belt. So yeah, and this, I think, perhaps falls into that category of things where, we need to protect the rights of people even when we disagree with them. So if they did seek a legal opinion,
100%. And the government has a right to get a legal opinion about the actions they're going to take, whether that opinion exists or not. As the Mr. Mott was suggesting, I have no idea. I'm not wading into that water. I have no clue. Not something I could opine on. That's not something I would even seek, would be a legal opinion provided by the Justice Department to the government in Canada. That's completely would be covered and bound by solicitor-client privilege and the relationship that the government should have. And the same way that would be for a citizen, right? Like, if a client came to me with something, there would be like the government asking me to turn over my legal opinion they gave to the client, like, go pound sand. No, not doing that. That's covered by privilege, right? Same thing would apply going back the other way. And it's important to have that, right? It's important. That's important for people to know that, like, with your lawyer, like, the person you should never lie to is your lawyer. That's like the one person who has a fiduciary duty, a duty of loyalty and obligation. Never lie to your lawyer. Tell them everything. Tell them everything, good and bad, because that is protected, right? Your lawyer is the one person that is, like, swore oaths to protect your secrets and to advise you on what to do in those situations. That never has to be turned over to anyone. That's protected information, and it's important to have that.
I got a good question here from one of our regular watchers. That's Cora. And she says, is there not a conflict of interest when one individual is in a judiciary role at the same time as a legislative role? The British have separated the roles of Solicitor General and the Attorney General. Thoughts on that, Blair?
One individual is in a judiciary. It's a little bit confusing. Are you talking like a judge that's also a legislator?
I think it's more like the Attorney General acting as Solicitor General. Well,
we do kind of have a separation, right? We do have the Attorney General of Canada, right? And then we do have the Justice Minister, right? So they kind of different, but they are kind of separate. Like, right? So they are separate roles, right? Like, the Attorney General of Canada is a group of lawyers. It's like a law firm, basically, right? Like, okay. So I'm not as apprised of how the British do it as much. I'm a Canadian trained lawyer.
Yeah, fair enough.
We are a birth of the British common law system, but I know our system of governance closely. I haven't studied in the UK. I've got enough case law to read in Canada and enough fights with the governments here in Canada to deal with, to focus my attention on.
Okay. I guess it's just a question of how independent I think some of these positions are, because in a way they all answer to the governor and council, or am I mistaken?
Yeah, and the governor and council is very powerful in Canada, right? Like, they are very powerful, and they're afforded a number of protections, right, under Section 39 of the Canada Evidence Act. Like, a lot of it's very hard to get information out from it. And then, look, again, there's good public policy reasons for that existing, right? When they're debating legislation, doing things, like, having that just out in the public while they're making those debates over it, it would make it so people couldn't freely speak, right, at these meetings, at these cabinet meetings. There needs to be an ability for the members of cabinet and the government to speak freely. Right, to speak very freely, very risk assessments back and forth with that, that they should have, again, some afforded protections for that. And again, it exists for very good reasons. It's, again, I don't always agree with what comes out of it. And in the Emergencies Act invocation, I think it was a gross abuse of power and unacceptable. But to go at the process itself for, governing councils existing and having the ability to freely speak, and that being bound and covered by cabinet privilege, that exists for very good reasons. It does.
No, I understand that, actually. because, like you say, they need to be able to speak freely. And it may not be to our benefit that we always see our sausage being made in that regard.
Exactly.
Somebody
And there's also state secrets too, right? Like, I mean, there could be state secrets being discussed, right? There could be national security reasons for not having that stuff discussed, right? Like, and it's no different than like, again, I've done a lot of drug trafficking, organized crime cases where you can get disclosure that could come out that has confidential informants that are police officers, and making sure their identities are protected, right? To making sure that the police are safe in doing this and playing the role to, like, that information does not need to go publicly, right? Who the CIs are, undercovers are. There's very good reasons for that. And the public may not always see that, may not always understand that, but there is very good reasons why that exists. And, being a lawyer who's experienced with some of these aspects of it, again, I do like our system that we have. It's not always perfect. It can be slow, but I do like our system that we have. I like the independence of our judiciary, and what we're seeing, hopefully the Mosley decision we can build back. I don't know if there's been public confidence issues. I have no idea. I live my own life, but if there were, I think decisions like this would help give more public confidence that we do have independent judiciaries who are not just going to rubber stamp what the government does.
Right.
And that's important to have. Like, that's so crucial and important to have.
I think maybe there's a concern over abuse of these rights, that are afforded, in terms of the confidentiality and the secrecy, and it kind of harkens back to the Mark Norman affair in my mind. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but he was the head of the Navy who basically got railroaded, and the RCMP raided his house in the middle of the night and seized all his computers because he contracted as he was authorized to do in a memorandum of understanding. He contracted a company, a shipbuilding company, that had already received a contract to build a couple of refuelers for the Navy, without which we basically don't have a Navy. And it was because when the Trudeau regime came to power, they decided to cancel all things Stephen Harper. And since that contract was awarded under Stephen Harper, they were like, no, we're going to get rid of it and probably give it to our friends at Irving on the East Coast. And that would have set the whole project back a number of years, and we wouldn't have had a blue water Navy whatsoever if that were the case. So he did the right thing for the Navy, and he was authorized to do it, but he ended up getting his house raided in the middle of the night, and the reasons for it apparently was leaking cabinet confidence, and the confidences that were breached there, I guess, are a matter of cabinet confidence as well. So that seems to be something that they kind of hide behind, and I think that is the overwhelming concern right now, is that there is some abuse of these protections in order to hide corruption. So, but I guess that's probably just something we have to live with in a free and democratic society, is that's always going to be a possibility.
Yeah, and I don't know too much on the particulars of that case to comment accurately on. I'm not sure if any civil suits arose out of that afterwards. A civil suit arose out of it, right? So, I mean, that's a nice segue into the civil litigation that we're commencing, right? Because civil rules of discovery, there's not as many things you can hide behind when you start getting into civil litigation and civil lawsuits, right? Like, the civil rules of discovery, they permit a lot more to get at it, a lot more on the record, a lot more has to be disclosed, because you get what's called like an implied undertaking when you get the documents. So there's a lot more discovery that comes out of that compared to like a judicial review, which is one of the reasons why, if your viewers aren't familiar, my law firm is sued on behalf of 20 plaintiffs, Cornell v. Trudeau, where we have named Prime Minister Trudeau personally, Chrystia Freeland personally, a number of the banks, the police, the Ottawa Police Service, I think it was interim chief Steve Bell at the time, and a number of other parties who participated in this unconstitutional conduct. And rules of discovery allow for a lot more in civil litigation compared to what comes out in a judicial review or in a criminal defense case or criminal trial, where there's a lot tighter rules around the rules of evidence, admissibility, what gets allowed, what gets disclosed. It's a completely different realm when you get into civil litigation territory.
Okay, so the same kind of protections, I guess they apply, but you mentioned that there's basically implied undertakings there. So if you receive that kind of information and it's sensitive, then you're not authorized to disclose it publicly, that kind of thing?
Exactly, yeah. You can't just go, you get something, and what's in Alberta, at least we call it like an affidavit of records, where you get to turn over everything material and relevant that you have. There's an implied undertaking that you can't just go take those documents and just publish them on the internet or go do stuff with them, right? Like it's an implied undertaking with those. Now, some of those could make their way into affidavits, which eventually become public records, but yeah, there's just different rules surrounding disclosure of evidence. Like, and again, some of the government stuff, they could still probably hit a Section 39 Canada Evidence Act to not disclose some of it, but there is a greater obligation to disclose material and relevant records. We're looking forward to getting those records from the banks as well, their involvement, what their orders were. I anticipate the bank's going to point the fingers at the government. The police, I think there's going to be a lot of finger pointing going all around, which I hope that they do that. I hope that they do that, and they start pointing the fingers, and we start getting all the documents, and we get to see really what went on here behind it. Because, you know, if we're getting into situations where there's clearly some malicious intent here to go at Canadians there, I mean, that opens up punitive damages, which is what we're pleading for it. And especially if the government had any knowledge or understanding, they knew what they were doing, and invoking it was unreasonable or didn't meet the test, and still went ahead and did it anyways. I mean, we may never get the hard proof of that in one way or another, but you know, it should be quite interesting what comes out in this litigation. And it's acted before the court, so I'm going to be hesitant with discussing besides what's been filed, as that's kind of, it's an ongoing matter, but it should be quite interesting.
And you mentioned that like Chrystia Freakland and Justin True are actually named in the lawsuit. So is it the case that if because of this ruling, I guess the federal court's ruling, that they didn't follow the act, they didn't follow the letter of the law, they lose some protections here and they become open to personal liability in that regard? Is that what's happening?
That's what we're arguing for in misfeasance of public office. And there's been some recent case law that's working its way through the courts for people that are part of putting forward unconstitutional pieces of legislation that the people that are involved with it can be held personally liable. There's a case I think it was out of Nova Scotia or New Brunswick that went through the Court of Appeal. It's currently before the Supreme Court of Canada. So that's a big one. That's a big one to follow and a big one to watch. And hopefully the Supreme Court does rule, upholds what the appellate court held there. And I think it's important that we named them personally for this. It was ultimately their decisions to do this. And we think that they should be personally held accountable for it. The courts may take a different view of it. Of course, again, back to stoicism, what's in my control, what's not in my control. I'm going to do the best what's in my control to go to proceed in this manner against people that in my informed opinion, I think was a gross abuse of power, and anybody that was involved with using that, we wanted to name in that lawsuit and personally go after them for such abuses. And I think it's an important thing to do. I think it's a very important thing to do. And again, it's one of those ones where it's duty bound, where it seemed like, given what I knew, the information I knew, and my involvement from the beginning, I kind of felt like I had no choice but to do this. It's guided by what I think the next right step is, right? Into the next right action, and doing what I believe to be the complete obligation. I didn't really think there was any other option but to do it, to my mind and in my opinion. Kind of, again, comes back to the feels like fate type of thing, how I even got involved in all of this. I'm just some guy from Calgary, just some hockey dad from Calgary, just trying to do the right thing, and having the stones and the courage to take on injustices. Like, that's something lawyers do, right? Like, people are like, oh, it takes so much courage to do this and that. It's like, well, not really. I mean, as a lawyer, that's my job. That's my obligation, to stand between state oppression and the citizens. Where I think it takes a lot of courage is the citizens that had the courage to speak truth to power, the citizens that had, that willfully knew they were going to get beaten by staying and exercising their constitutional rights and still did it. That takes courage. That's an act of courage. That's a tremendous act of courage to what, a number of average Canadian citizens stood up and did. What I'm doing as a lawyer is my job. That's an obligation.
Well said. And I think it's all very much in line with what you mentioned there with the Stoic principles, the values of courage, justice, courage, justice, wisdom, and temperance. Is the way that it's usually stated. And I think that's what Ryan Halliday advances as well, is those. And that's somebody that you listen to as well, right? You've read some of Ryan Halliday?
I have all of his books. I listen to the Daily Stoic almost every day. Like, stoicism is part of my life. And it's something to lean into, right? Like, and I say, it takes courage for the citizens to do all of this. But this does, these types of litigation and this type of work that we do, like, it does take a lot out of myself as well. It does. Like, it does. And finding that stoicism that I can always just return to really like replenish my soul. I have a deep faith. I don't push on people, but I have a deep faith in myself that it's, again, a very private thing for myself, my faith that I have. But stoicism is just something I can return to draw on that well of strength when I need it, when I need it, when I know I need to step up in the big moments. And it really allows, myself to be engaged in the moment. And, Ryan Holiday has really helped put stoicism kind of more in the mainstream, in terms of not just being very dense academic text. He really makes it digestible. So for those who have various podcasts, the Daily Stoic is a really good one. One I listen to every morning.
Yeah, I listen to that one every day too. The Daily Stoic. It's only like 10 minutes long most of the time, and then he'll do like an hour and a half, a full length podcast on the weekends. But it's usually just like a daily meditation that probably includes a quote from the meditations, and how it applies to your life and to help guide you through the day. So it's quite helpful. And I was just showing, like, this is Ryan's website for anybody who's interested, and he's got a lot of really good books. The Obstacle is the Way. I really like that one.
Yep.
I've got a couple of them. I can't remember what the other one was. I don't see it here, but the Obstacle is the Way is an excellent one.
Courage is Calling. I don't think he's got the Courage one. I think he's got Courage is Calling. Ego is the Enemy. Discipline is Destiny. Yeah, he's got one in the biography of all the Stoics too. A number of different Stoics. He doesn't have one there. Interesting is coin Memento Mori, and it's basically remember that you are mortal. Remember that you are mortal. And I think that really helps get, they used to whisper that into generals' ears when they would have the big triumphs in Rome. Remember that you are mortal. Remember that you are mortal. And I think that one thing that Stoicism I really like with it, and other things that apply, is it gives you a real sense of humility and proper humility, right? And I think humility goes a long way. I think people can sense it. And when you're being a very sincerely humble person, it really shines through. And one thing is like, being humble is being right-sized, right? You're not better than and you're not worse than. You're not sitting in shame, because sitting in shame is just another way of it's all about me. Everything's all about me. It's my ego. It's also not having so much pride and arrogance in yourself that it's all, I'm the greatest thing that ever happened. You're right-sized. You're in that right size when you have confidence and belief in yourself, but you're not arrogant in it, and you're also not, you have enough self-doubt that you're questioning yourself, but you don't have so much self-doubt that you're sitting in shame, and it's just all about you. It's so really, being engaged every day in the world of being your best self. And that's something that I think everybody can apply. And I think it's very accessible to everybody. I think Stoicism is something that is accessible to everybody. And that's the point of it. When the Greeks and the Romans were engaging in philosophy, it was about how is it making a difference in my everyday life? Where Western philosophy in the last 50, we'll say, call it 100 years, where they've really gotten into analytic philosophy, which is important. It's helped computer development, computer science. It's really helped theory of language, but it's very arguing about the minutia of words, which is important. Definitions matter. All of that stuff matters, but it had lost its sense of what philosophy was originally intended for, which was to make your life better on a day-to-day basis, to guide your actions, to have a moral compass that you can turn to in making decisions. And as I've kind of gotten a little bit older and then, away from my undergrad degree, I still read philosophy every day. I've really drawn to Stoicism. It's something that it makes a difference in my day-to-day life.
Yeah, I tend to think of it as just almost like an instruction manual for how to be a good human. And a lot of what you were saying here earlier too, it always kind of comes down to a question, I guess, of am I doing the right thing? Like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing right now? And it's not as outcome oriented as you might think. Like you said, it's really more about whether or not you're doing the right thing for the situation, for the task at hand. And it's interesting. Remember that you are mortal. For some reason, I think I probably heard a different translation or something, but it's remember your death is what I understand Memento Mori to be. Because you are going to die and your time here on Earth is very limited. So you might as well make the most of it. And well, how do you do that? I think that Stoic philosophy provides some very strong guiding principles in terms of how to be a good human, how to live well, and how to avoid suffering and seek the kind of fulfillment and self-actualization. So it's and Ryan does a wonderful job, like you said, of just kind of boiling it down into something that's easily digestible by anybody, regardless of whether they have a degree in philosophy. So highly recommended for sure. Yeah, he's pretty great. And there was one other thing I wanted to show you here, but I remember I had to go look this up. I don't have a graphic for this one, but this was Marcus Aurelius, and this is the kind of thing.
Oh yeah, the when you wake up in the morning, we'll quote. Yeah, we talked about this one. Yeah, you should read that one. That's in book 2. That one starts book 2 of Meditations. Yeah, that's the opening of book 2.
That's right. I was actually just reading it this morning. It's funny because I got a new copy of the Meditations, and it's like a hardcover. And usually I just carry a paperback around with me that's all full of like pencil marks and stuff like that. But I wanted one that's like a nice copy that I can keep on my shelf. And I was just going through it this morning. And the book 1 is basically like all these attributions, these different people in his life from whom he's learned important lessons. And so he basically just, he names the person in his life, and then he talks about the lessons that he's taken from it. So when he really gets into the self-coaching stuff, that's book 2. And the first thing he says as he's coaching himself is, quote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and I have recognized that the wrongdoer is nature related to my own, not of the same blood and birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine. And so none of them can hurt me. No one can implicate me in ugliness, nor can I feel angry at my relative or hate him. We were born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the 2 rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural. To feel anger at someone, to turn your back on him, these are unnatural."
Such a great, so great. That's, yeah.
So it basically, in the comment dog, I think it says that people suck.
It does. But it has a bit of a different, when you actually read it, it's, he looks at that, he's like, brace yourself for that. But then he's also, you can live in that world where you don't need to be implicated in their ugliness. You don't need to be implicated in that. And they may not recognize what they're doing, how their own wrongness of what they're doing. It seems like it's a cynical look at human nature, but it's actually a very optimistic look when you really read and reflect on that. And so the wrongdoer, they have a nature of my own. They share the same mind. That's that push that I was talking about earlier. They share rationality. They share the gift of reason. They share the gift of being able to weigh things and use their rational self and their rational mind. The share of the divine, what makes human beings unique, that separates us from every other species, right, is our level of rationality, our ability to meditate and reflect on our own thoughts. We can think on I feel upset. We can take it another level to, is it right that I'm feeling upset? We can think about our own thoughts. And that's what makes humans so unique and such a great gift. And what he's saying about that is that when people have that, they still share the divine. He has this wonderful love of humanity that's just so consistent throughout Meditations, and a love of the divine and a love of contributing to the common good and being engaged in the world. And that gives a way where it's like, you don't just throw your hands up and like, oh, there's these Twitter trolls. Well, the whole world sucks. Like, no, they just don't even know better. What they say doesn't even need to affect me. If they knew what I knew and they were fully apprised, they may have a different view. So I'm not even going to be upset about that at all. They can't implicate me in their ugliness. That doesn't define me. That's not who I am. Humans are better than that. They just don't know better. And that's such a great view that you can take towards life, right? Instead of getting sucked in this like hole of negativity, you can take out of that so much positivity. And that's such a great quote about Marcus's love of humanity. It looks like it on its face, he's saying people suck completely. But what he's saying is that I don't need to get dragged into that. People have their own free will. They can act that way. Tell yourself people are going to be that way towards you. So when they are, it doesn't bother you, right? It doesn't bother you. When opposing counsel says something outrageous to me, doesn't really bother me.
Yeah, just let me know if you got to bounce there, Blair. I understand you're a very busy guy, and I appreciate you being so generous with your time. But what I was going to say to that too is sort of an overarching theme that I take from the Meditations is it's kind of a personal duty of his, and perhaps the Stoics more broadly, that we should serve humanity.
Yes.
Instead of like giving into that bitterness and resentment, the kind of those are the lower order, the passions as they describe them, So we should serve humanity because, like, we're in a position to do so. If you're able to engage with those higher principles, with the divinity, as he puts it, then we're the ones who, should be doing our best to guide things. And it's human nature that we're observing. Like when we see people engaging in these kinds of pernicious behaviors, we need to understand that it is well, I guess for all of us, it is our cross to bear. And so we should probably help them in bearing these crosses and bearing their crosses. And if we're a little further down the road to enlightenment, pardon me, that's a pretty maybe it sounds a little bit hubris to say it that way, but I'm doing my best to interpret what Marcus is
well, and it's saying. One of the criticisms that Stoicism got is that it's the philosophy of kings and emperors, right? It's rich people philosophy or whatever. It's people, but there's no doubt why the Stoics would become successful people practicing. And successful doesn't necessarily need to even be monetary, right? Because there's such a love of humanity that just goes through it, that they're people you want to be around, right? They have personalities that are attractive to be around, that are engaging to be around, that are, there's a people that'll sincerely listen to you, engage with people. Don't judge people based on their social status, things like that. They're people in the world that you inherently that just have attractive personality qualities that you want to be around, that you want to talk to, that you want to engage in, that are people that'll overcome adversity, not get thrown off track because someone criticized them once that they just, okay, well, I guess I should just give up because someone didn't like that. No, it gives you great internal fortitude and strength to push on and persevere through things. And I think that's why a lot of the Stoics become successful, both monetarily, spiritually, members of their community. Like one of the big things that Stoics had that differed from a lot of schools of philosophy was that, a lot of schools of philosophy wanted the philosopher needs to isolate, go into the woods and think deeply about life's problems and remove themselves from society. Whereas Stoicism says, no, you need to be engaged and serve the common good. You need to go out and be involved in politics, in the world, and in your community, and giving back and be engaged with the world, because that's your job as a human being. And I think that's why it typically gets ascribed as being, the philosophy of kings and emperors, and, a philosophy that rich people go to and all of that. And well, there's a good reason why it's that way. There's a good reason. And again, it doesn't need to be rich in the sense of like monetary things. I mean, typically it flows as well, but rich in terms of people that are well liked, well received, have a great reputation in their communities, are really, someone that people turn to, that can rely upon, that are reliable human beings that you want to be around. And I think that's the beauty of Stoicism, is its love of humanity.
Yeah, and I think what we're talking about here, perhaps a better word than richness might be successful. Like whatever your endeavors happen to be, like you are successful at them. And it's because there's a kind of purity of mind that comes along with embracing these principles and reflecting properly on our circumstances or challenges. And so it shouldn't be surprising that somebody who leads a mindful life is going to be successful in those endeavors. And I like that you're kind of highlighting the way that that those people are attractive, in the sense that these positive people tend to find each other, because I think we're seeing a lot of that over the course of the last few years. We're kind of putting our society to the stress test over the last few years, and it seems that all of the really great people are finding each other right now, and they tend to cohere. And we're sort of at a crescendo in all of this, where all of this is what I say is the bright side in all of this. Like, we're living through some very dark times, but the bright side is that we get to meet all the greatest Canadians alive. And now we're sort of finding each other, we're cohering and becoming a force to be reckoned with, as we can see with some of these wins in the courts.
Absolutely. And I think it's a complete it's clearly a movement that's happening, obviously. And the best disinfectant is light. Light is the best disinfectant, and continuing to bring the light and remain positive and remain, hopeful about humanity, hopeful about Canada. I think that is something that, even in the face of all what we have had to endure and what we're seeing happening, I think that light wins out in the end. And that's just something I choose to make that belief in. There are difficulties. There's going to continue to be difficult times ahead, but it's important that good people step up and play their role and do it honorably and do it for the right reasons. And I think that there is positive changes happening, and I played a very small role in that. I'm just one person, but it takes a community. It takes all of us, and it takes a love of humanity and a commitment to this to do it. And I hope that I hope more light. I hope we can bring more light to things and not get so bogged down in this negativity that we see happening in the world. It doesn't mean you just think everything's sunshine and roses. It's not. Like, and that's the nice thing with Stoicism is, like, no, there are difficult times. It's going to be hard. It's not easy, and to be prepared for that in advance. So when things don't happen the way you anticipate them to, or you face hardships, you can lean into that. But yeah, I expected this. I expected difficulties. That's okay. Let's go. Just another battle I got to win day to day. And like I said, it brings awesome people together. We would have never met, but for the Cornell case, going down CPAC, hanging out with Theo Fleury and those people, and hanging out, meeting senators down there that were shaking hands, saying honored to meet us, and how just how great that was. The amount of people and contacts we were able to meet. Wouldn't have happened with all of this. Like you and I would have never met, but for the Cornell decision and the Cornell case, and been able to develop a friendship and a bond that we've been able to develop now, and it's brought a lot of awesome people together. And I think that being the light against the darkness is the best path forward. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you're kind of speaking my language here too, because lean into it is one of the things that I advise everybody to do. And I think I take that from the obstacle is the way when it comes to Ryan Holiday there. It's like kind of whatever it is that's getting you down right now, like you got to face it head on and get out there and get after it. And I think that's what, like I say, all the best people in Canada are doing right now. And the CPAC experience, there were people from all over the world there, and they were just spectacular people. We were hanging out with Christine Anderson and Theo Fleury, who sang a duet for us at the piano bar at the end of the night. Did you ever think you were going to see that? No, and it was nice. And one of the things is, I don't drink. But it was nice to have a night out at the piano bar while everybody was singing away. And I was singing my heart out too, having a great time. And it was noticed, that the veterans that were there, not that we weren't drinking, they noticed that and picked up on that too. And like just how serious we were and how great we were and like how awesome it was. And just how much fun that was watching, a European parliamentarian and Theo Fleury sing a duet together and have the same one getting out Canada, and just the amazing people that we got to meet them. You get to meet them face to face, not on what's said about people on the internet or what you can control, what you can't. Just meeting them face to face and the human interactions that we had, and just that was something I'll never forget. And that was having, like I said, having Canadian senators come up and who I hadn't even met, just like, oh, you're Mr. Ector, and shake my hand. It's an honor to meet you. Like, well, it's an honor to meet you, Senator. Actually, what do you mean? I'm some guy from Calgary. It's an honor to meet you. Having those interactions with people and staying grounded, and I think that. I think that was a trip I'll never forget. And the contact. I'm looking forward to next year already. Next year, 2025, absolutely, we're gonna have to do that one again, because that was a special experience. And I was telling my wife about all the people that we met and just how awesome they were, and just how committed people were to upholding rights, upholding freedoms, and just where they were at and the positive energy there. Like it's unlike anything I've ever been part of, anything I've ever seen. So it was quite special. Yes, indeed. And I think the senator to whom you're referring there was Mike McDonald, who is my senator, actually. It was really, it's small world, man. It was just incredible. He showed up in the piano bar and he was wearing his Cape Breton tartan vest with the tartan tie. And I was like, oh, hey, you're my senator. Just spectacular people all around. As I keep saying, like, it's really not hard to tell who the good guys are in this fight. It just isn't. Blair, I think I'm gonna hand it over to you here for some final thoughts before we sign off. I really appreciate what you're doing, obviously, and it's a spectacular win, biggest one in Canada so far. And I really enjoyed like the time that we had there at CPAC as well, how it seems like this is a common thread anyway. How you've embraced these values of stoicism, and they've been instrumental in your own success in your own life. I found that that really resonates with me, obviously. I was I'm happy to have
made this connection and formed this bond. If you don't mind, maybe just give us a few parting thoughts here before we sign off. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. The feeling is definitely mutual. I'm really glad we met, and once we got to talk about philosophy and stoicism, got to build those connections just through philosophy. That was wonderful, and just the kind of some parting thoughts that I have here is that we are in an important turning point in Canadian history, and a very important one, and that it's important to educate ourselves and to use peaceful means to advocate our interests going forward, and that light is the best disinfectant, and that we need to continue to bring light, and we need to do what we can to uphold what makes us Canadians and what the values that we have as Canadians. And Jeff, I wanted to thank you also for your service. I have my family has some very proud military history, which I've shared some of that with you throughout World War II as well, for the British Empire. I'm very proud of my British roots. So I wanted to thank you for your service, and as this is Veterans for Freedom as well, hosting this, just the level of camaraderie, teamwork, in it together, mission first, just something I have a tremendous amount of respect for, something I try to adopt in my own law firm through this. And my own parting thoughts are that we will be successful in the end. We already are. We already are. We already are. And it's coming from purity of purpose and continuing to uphold this. And to also, a message that could take away is that even when you interact with anybody you disagree with, respect that. Respect the ability to disagree, and how thankful we are that we can do this, that we live in a Canadian society where we can disagree with one another without fear of immense reprisals for that we can have an engaged dialogue. And that what I'm seeing happening, in particular with the judiciary and the decisions that have come down, is that this is an example of a thriving democracy working, that this is a great example of our judiciary and our system of government working, and why I feel that the way the British system works is the best system of governance for people. May not be perfect. The judiciary may be a year or two behind the decisions that governments are making, but we have important checks and balances in place, and let's use those. Let's use those through the peaceful democratic means that we have, because we are very, very blessed to be Canadian. And I have seen a government that has made us want to be ashamed to be Canadian and want to erase our history and our heritage. Let's not let them do that to us. Let's not let them erase our history and our heritage and our promotion of freedoms and of rights and in a free and democratic society, because that is very important to uphold and to cherish. We should be proud to be Canadians, even with people we disagree with fundamentally, that we can have those dialogues and those disagreements through peaceful means, and that we will continue to advance the cause of freedom, and may the freedom forever exist in this country, and that it not be extinguished. And that if those who are trying to take away our freedoms, we will resist it all the way. And we will not tolerate, we will not stand for it. We will be people of character that will oppose it for the right reasons, and that this country will forever remain free, and it will forever be a country that upholds and respects human dignity and human rights.
Yeah, very well said. And I would add, I guess, that the thing is, like, we're going through these challenges now, and like I said, like, our institutions and our society are essentially being put to the test. Like, we have this stress test now. It shows a few weak points, and what we have really in crisis, there lies opportunity, and we all have this opportunity to shape the course of history and leave something better for the next generation. And that's really kind of what it's all about at the end of the day. So with that, folks, I will direct you over to the Veterans for Freedom website. You can subscribe to our newsletter by clicking subscribe here. Join Veterans for Freedom if you're a veteran by clicking join here, and support Veterans for Freedom by clicking support here. You'll have two options. You can donate to us directly to pay for my StreamYard account and the website, etc., or you can join the support fund, sign up for a monthly donation by clicking one of the buttons here with your credit card. Everybody who donates to the support fund gets a chance to vote on where the donations go. I don't see the candidates up here for this month yet, but last month it was Kayla Pollock who ended up getting the pool of donations. So well done, everyone. If you don't want to use your credit card, it's you can sign up for e-transfers at fund@veteransforfreedom.ca. So that's fund@veterans4freedom.ca. And auto deposit enabled preferably, but if you're not able to do that, please use the password Fund for Freedom. That's all caps fund number 4 Freedom, and we'll make sure that that gets off to a worthy cause. And that brings us all the way back around to Marcus Aurelius. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. So I think we're all doing a pretty wonderful job of that so far. And thanks, Blair, so much for taking the time and picking the quote, by the way, for being so generous with your time here today. I know you're a really busy guy, so I appreciate it immensely. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. I'm going to sign off now.
All right, man. Take care. And to everybody out there who stayed with us, stay frosty and stay safe out there.
Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs.